Matthew Walker's hand froze halfway to his coffee cup as the conference room door slammed shut. The entire leadership team had just walked out of the emergency board meeting he'd called. Only one person remained seated at the polished mahogany table. A stunning black woman in a crisp white blazer who looked him straight in the eye and said the words that would either save or destroy everything. "You're killing this company." The silence that followed those words stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Matthew Walker, CEO of Walker Industries, had never, not once in his 8 years of leadership, been spoken to with such unflinching directness. Board members deferred to him. Senior executives measured their words carefully. Even his own mother chose her moments to challenge him. But this woman, this external consultant he'd hired through the standard procurement process just 4 weeks ago, sat perfectly composed in her chair, mahogany skin glowing against the stark white of her blazer, waiting for his response as if she'd just commented on the weather. Matthew's steel-gray eyes, the same shade that had intimidated countless business rivals and secured million-dollar deals, met hers without wavering. At 38, he commanded respect through presence alone. 6 feet 2 inches of tailored authority, broad shoulders that filled his custom Italian suits, and the kind of devastating good looks that made financial reporters stumble over their questions. His dark hair, perfectly styled, caught the morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 42nd floor conference room. Yet none of that seemed to register with the woman across from him. She simply waited, her warm brown eyes steady and patient, as if she had all the time in the world for him to process what she'd just said. "Excuse me?" The words came out colder than he'd intended, but years of emotional distance, learned from necessity after his father's death when he was 12, had become his default response to unexpected challenges. Eliana Thomas adjusted the sleeve of her blazer with deliberate precision. At 34, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd earned every opportunity through merit alone. Her natural curves were impeccably tailored in professional attire that commanded respect while never apologizing for her femininity. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek bun that emphasized the elegant line of her neck and the intelligence that sparked in her dark eyes. "You heard me correctly, Mr. Walker." Her voice was warm honey over steel, diplomatically delivered, but uncompromising in its message. "Your company is dying, and your proposed solution will only accelerate the process." The emergency board meeting had been called because Walker Industries had just lost its largest client. General Motors, representing 40% of their annual revenue, had terminated their contract with a tersely worded letter, citing failure to innovate and outdated manufacturing processes. $60 million in annual revenue, gone with a single phone call. Matthew had proposed the logical solution: a 35% workforce reduction to maintain profit margins. It was Business 101. When revenue drops, you cut costs. His grandfather hadn't built Walker Industries from nothing by being sentimental about difficult decisions. Yet every board member who'd walked out of this room had done so after Eliana Thomas quietly, methodically, dismantled his entire strategy with numbers, projections, and an analysis so thorough it made his Harvard MBA feel like a participation trophy. "Miss Thomas," he said, rising from his chair to reclaim the physical advantage his height usually provided, "I appreciate your perspective, but I've been running this company for 8 years. We've remained profitable while our competitors have innovated past you." She rose as well, meeting him eye to eye across the mahogany table without a hint of intimidation. "Your competitors aren't just winning new contracts, Mr. Walker. They're stealing your existing clients because they've invested in their future while you've been managing quarterly profit reports." The accusation hit like a physical blow. Matthew prided himself on forward thinking, on honoring his grandfather's legacy of innovation. Walker Industries had been manufacturing precision automotive parts for 60 years, building their reputation on quality and reliability. "Our quality standards are the highest in the industry," he said, circling the table slowly, a predator sizing up unexpected prey. Eliana remained perfectly still, tracking his movement with calm assessment. "Your quality standards are excellent. Your manufacturing processes are still using 3-axis systems when competitors have moved to 5-axis simultaneous machining with real-time quality monitoring. Your research and development spending has decreased 60% over the past 5 years. Your top 3 engineers have been hired away by competitors in the past 18 months. Should I continue? Each fact struck with surgical precision. Matthew felt his carefully constructed confidence wavering as she spoke. But years of boardroom battles had taught him never to show weakness. "You've been here 4 weeks," he said, stopping directly across from her. This close, he could catch the subtle scent of her perfume, something warm and sophisticated, with hints of jasmine and sandalwood that seemed to match her personality perfectly. He found himself studying the elegant curve of her neck, the way the conference room lighting brought out golden undertones in her rich brown skin, the graceful movement of her hands as she spoke with passionate precision about manufacturing processes. "I've been here 8 years, and in those 8 years, your annual revenue growth has averaged 2%, while your primary competitors have averaged 12%. She reached for a folder on the table, her fingers brushing against his as she slid manufacturing efficiency reports across the polished wood. "Your employee satisfaction surveys show 70% are considering other opportunities. Your equipment has an average age of 15 years versus an industry standard of 8. The accidental contact sent an unexpected jolt through Matthew's system. He'd noticed her beauty when she'd first walked into his office 4 weeks ago. It was impossible not to. But attraction was a luxury he couldn't afford, especially with consultants. Workplace relationships were career suicide, particularly for someone in his position. He'd learned that lesson the hard way during his McKinsey years, watching a promising colleague's career derail after a relationship with a client representative created conflicts of interest that destroyed both their professional credibility. Since then, Matthew had maintained careful emotional distance from anyone connected to Walker Industries, until now. Now, however, with her fingers still resting near his on the reports, he found himself studying the elegant curve of her hand, the way the conference room lighting brought out golden highlights in her dark skin. "Focus," he commanded himself. "These numbers don't tell the whole story," he said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier edge. "They tell exactly the story." Eliana leaned forward slightly, her passion for the subject evident in the way her eyes lit up. "Walker Industries isn't failing because of market conditions or bad luck. It's failing because leadership has chosen short-term profit protection over long-term viability." The words stung because they carried the ring of truth. Matthew had made those exact decisions, cutting research and development, delaying equipment upgrades, focusing on quarterly earnings rather than multi-year strategy. Every choice had been logical, defensible, profitable, and apparently, collectively, disastrous. "So what would you recommend?" he asked, genuinely curious despite his wounded pride. "Investment, not reduction." She straightened, and he found himself oddly disappointed by the increased distance between them. $25 million in new equipment. Mazak CNC machining centers, DMG Mori multi-axis lathes, and Trumpf laser cutting systems. 18-month timeline for complete modernization. Employee retraining programs instead of layoffs. Research and development budget restored to pre-recession levels. That's... Matthew did quick calculations in his head. "That's $50 million in total investment. We don't have that kind of capital available." "You don't have $50 million available because you've been paying it out in dividends to keep shareholders happy instead of investing it in the company's future." Her tone remained professional, but he could hear the underlying frustration. "Your grandfather built this company on innovation, not fear." The mention of his grandfather struck deeper than she could have known. Thomas Walker had been a visionary, creating manufacturing processes that revolutionized automotive parts production. He'd built Walker Industries by taking calculated risks, by believing in the future rather than protecting the present. "My grandfather didn't have to answer to shareholders every quarter," Matthew said quietly. "No," Eliana agreed, her voice softening slightly. "But he also didn't inherit a company with 60 years of reputation and expertise. You have assets your grandfather could only dream of." The question is whether you have the courage to use them. Courage. The word hung in the air between them like a challenge. Matthew had spent 8 years making safe decisions, protecting what his family had built, rather than expanding it. He'd told himself it was responsibility, stewardship, wisdom gained from watching his father die in a factory accident when safety protocols were ignored in favor of speed. But maybe it was just fear. He studied Eliana's face, searching for signs of manipulation or agenda. Instead, he found only genuine concern, not for him personally, but for the company, for the 1,500 employees whose livelihoods depended on Walker Industries' success. Have you ever been in a room where you were the only one brave enough to speak the truth? Tell me about your experience in the comments. Let me know where you're watching from, and subscribe if you're already invested in this corporate showdown. You really believe this investment strategy will work? He asked. I believe your current strategy will kill this company within 2 years, she replied without hesitation. I believe your proposed workforce reduction will accelerate client defection because your remaining employees will be overworked and demoralized. I believe the conference room door opened with a sharp click. Albert Collins, the board's longest-serving member, stepped inside with the measured gait of a man accustomed to being heard. Matthew, Albert said, his silver hair perfectly styled, despite the early hour. We need to discuss emergency cost-cutting measures immediately. The board is concerned about the delayed response to the General Motors situation. Professional distance snapped back into place, like a rubber band released. Eliana stepped away from the table, gathering her reports with practiced efficiency. The moment of connection, intellectual, professional, and something more dangerous, dissolved under the weight of corporate reality. I'll have alternative recommendations on your desk Monday morning, Eliana said, her tone returning to perfectly neutral consulting speak. But as she walked toward the door, Matthew caught something in her eyes, a flash of disappointment that matched his own. For just a moment, they'd connected over shared passion for the company's potential. Now the walls were back up, professional boundaries firmly re-established. Albert waited until Eliana had left before closing the door with deliberate finality. That woman is trouble, Matthew, he said, settling into a chair with practiced authority. The board is concerned about her influence on your decision-making. Some are questioning whether outside perspectives are appropriate, given the current crisis. Matthew barely heard him. His mind was still processing everything Eliana had said, everything she'd made him see about his own leadership. For the first time in 8 years, someone had looked at Walker Industries and seen not just problems to be managed, but potential to be unleashed. The question was whether he had the courage to listen. The weekend passed in a blur of spreadsheets, industry reports, and black coffee that grew cold, while Eliana lost herself in the labyrinth of Walker Industries' financial data. Her Lincoln Park apartment, usually a sanctuary of carefully curated calm, had transformed into a war room. Documents covered every surface of her dining table. Laptop screens glowed from multiple angles, and sticky notes created a rainbow of analysis across her living room wall. By Sunday evening, the picture was clear and devastating. Research and development spending had plummeted from $12 million annually to $4.8 million over 5 years. Every cut had been justified by quarterly earnings pressure. Every reduction rationalized as temporary efficiency measures. Meanwhile, Walker Industries' competitors had increased their R&D investments by an average of 40%. The brain drain was even worse than she'd suspected. Dr. Sarah Williams, their lead materials engineer, had left for Tesla 6 months ago with a 60% salary increase. Mark Donald, who developed their most innovative precision drilling process, was now working for a German competitor. Even their junior engineers were receiving recruitment calls weekly. Most damning of all was the equipment analysis. Manufacturing machinery that should have been replaced every 8 to 10 years was still running after 15, held together by increasingly expensive maintenance and the expertise of aging technicians who'd learned to coax miracles from obsolete technology. Monday morning found Matthew arriving at the office at 6:30, a habit that had served him well through 8 years of leadership. Walker Industries occupied the top 12 floors of a downtown Chicago high-rise, with the executive offices claiming the 42nd floor's commanding view of Lake Michigan. His corner office, inherited from his grandfather and redecorated exactly once in 8 years, reflected the company's heritage. Rich mahogany furniture, leather-bound volumes of manufacturing journals, and framed photographs of the original factory from 1963 created an atmosphere of established success. The only modern touches were the array of computer monitors displaying real-time production data and financial metrics. Matthew's morning routine was precise and unchanging. Review overnight production reports, check international markets, scan industry news. Today, however, his focus shattered the moment he saw the comprehensive analysis waiting on his desk. 137 pages of meticulously researched documentation, bound in professional navy blue covers, with Walker Industries' logo embossed in silver. The title page was elegantly simple: Strategic Analysis and Recommendations for Sustainable Growth, prepared by Thomas Consulting Group. The executive summary alone took his breath away. Drawing on her extensive experience with similar companies and access to industry databases Matthew hadn't known existed, Elia hadn't just analyzed their current situation, she'd mapped their future. 2 scenarios, presented with devastating clarity. Path 1. Implement the proposed workforce reduction. Maintain current equipment. Continue reduced R&D spending. Result: company bankruptcy within 24 months as remaining clients defected to more innovative competitors. Path 2. $25 million investment in cutting-edge manufacturing equipment. 18-month modernization timeline. Restored research and development budget. Comprehensive employee retraining. Result: projected 40% revenue increase within 3 years, with 18-month ROI break-even and 32% profit margin improvement. Industry leadership in precision manufacturing innovation. The financial modeling was flawless. The competitive analysis was brutal in its honesty. The implementation timeline was ambitious but achievable. It was, Matthew realized with a mixture of admiration and frustration, the most brilliant strategic document he'd ever read. His intercom buzzed at 8:15. "Mr. Walker, Miss Thomas is here for your 9 o'clock meeting. Send her in." Elia entered wearing a charcoal gray suit that somehow managed to be both strictly professional and subtly alluring. Her hair was styled in a low chignon that emphasized the graceful line of her neck, and she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly how good her work was. "I trust you've had time to review the analysis," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk with fluid grace. Matthew searched for words that wouldn't reveal how thoroughly she'd dismantled every assumption he'd held about his own company. "Comprehensive. It's necessary." Her warm brown eyes held his steadily. "The question is whether you have the institutional courage to implement it." Institutional courage. The phrase struck him as perfectly chosen. This wasn't about personal bravery, but about the willingness to risk everything on a vision of what Walker Industries could become, rather than settling for what it had been. "The board will never approve $25 million in capital expenditure," he said. "Not with current quarterly results." "Then the board will be responsible for the company's failure." Eliana opened her tablet with practiced efficiency. "Mr. Walker, may I ask you something personal?" The shift caught him off guard. "Personal? Why did you become CEO of Walker Industries?" The question was simple. The answer was anything but. Matthew had been 29 when his grandfather died, fresh from Harvard Business School and a 3-year stint at McKinsey & Company. He'd planned to gain experience at major corporations, maybe start his own consulting firm. The family business had been a distant future consideration, something to think about in his 40s. Then, cancer took Thomas Walker in 6 months, and suddenly Matthew was responsible for 1,500 employees, 60 years of family legacy, and a manufacturing empire his grandfather had built from nothing. "I inherited it," he said finally. "That's not what I asked." Eliana's voice remained gentle, but her gaze was penetrating. "Why did you stay? Why have you spent 8 years of your life protecting something you could have sold for $200 million on the day you inherited it. Because selling felt like betrayal. Because his grandfather had trusted him with something precious. Because 1,500 families depended on Walker Industries for their livelihoods, their health insurance, their children's college funds. Because his father had died believing the company would continue to innovate, to lead, to matter. My grandfather built this from nothing, Matthew said quietly. He started with a garage, a lathe, and a vision for precision manufacturing using proprietary 5-axis machining processes that achieved tolerances within 2 microns. When Detroit was producing cars with parts that failed every 50,000 miles, Thomas Walker was creating components that lasted twice as long. Eliana's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Tell me about your father. The question hit like a physical blow. Matthew rarely discussed David Walker, even with family. The pain of losing his father at 12 had never quite healed, compounded by the guilt that David had died trying to prove a new safety protocol that might have saved lives. He was the innovator, Matthew said, his voice catching slightly. My grandfather was the businessman, but my father, he saw possibilities no one else could imagine. He died testing a new manufacturing process that could have revolutionized worker safety. And you've been managing the company like he's still watching, Eliana said with startling insight. The observation cut deeper than any financial analysis could have. Since inheriting leadership, Matthew had made every decision through the lens of protecting what his father and grandfather had built. He'd focused on preservation rather than growth, safety rather than innovation, fear rather than courage. Fear rather than courage. The modernization plan, he said, changing the subject before the conversation became too personal. Walk me through the implementation timeline. For the next hour, they worked through details with the kind of intellectual partnership Matthew had never experienced. Eliana's expertise in manufacturing efficiency complemented his understanding of company culture and financial constraints. They found compromises that maintained the plan's integrity while addressing practical limitations. Phase 1, $15 million for the most critical equipment upgrades, focused on their highest volume production lines. Phase 2, remaining $10 million spread over 18 months as new contracts justified continued investment. Employee retraining could be accomplished largely through partnerships with local technical colleges, spreading costs over 2 years while providing workers with valuable certifications. The research and development budget restoration could be gradual. $2 million increase immediately, with additional funding tied to revenue milestones. It was still ambitious. It was still risky. But it was achievable. This could actually work, Matthew said, surprised by his own optimism. It will work, Eliana corrected with quiet conviction. The question is whether you can convince your board to support it. The board meeting was scheduled for Friday, 3 days to build consensus among 11 strong-willed individuals who'd already expressed skepticism about dramatic changes. Albert Collins will fight this, Matthew said. He's been pushing cost-cutting measures since the GM contract ended. Then you'll need allies. Eliana made notes on her tablet. Who on the board shares your grandfather's vision for innovation? Richard Wright, our CFO, Sarah Mitchell from operations. Maybe David Park if we can show him solid financial projections. That's 3 votes including yours. You need 6 for majority approval. The mathematics of board politics were unforgiving. Matthew would need to convince 3 additional members that investment was better than reduction, that risk was preferable to safety. I'll need your help, he said, the admission coming harder than expected. You'll have it. Eliana's response was immediate and warm. This company deserves to succeed, Mr. Walker. Your employees deserve leadership that fights for their future, not just their paychecks. The sincerity in her voice struck him unexpectedly. Matthew found himself watching the way passion animated her features when she spoke about the company's potential, how her dark eyes sparked with intensity, how her voice carried conviction that made him believe in possibilities he'd never considered. She was brilliant, beautiful, and completely unaware of the effect she was having on his carefully maintained professional composure. Most consultants maintained careful emotional distance from their clients' outcomes. Eliana spoke about Walker Industries like she genuinely cared about its survival. Why does this matter to you? He asked impulsively. For the first time since he'd met her, Eliana seemed caught off guard by a question. She set down her stylus and looked out the window at Lake Michigan's gray-blue expanse. Matthew had asked about her background during one of their working dinners, sensing there was something personal driving her passion for manufacturing excellence. "My father worked in manufacturing for 37 years, she said finally. He started as a line worker at a steel mill in Gary, Indiana, and worked his way up to floor supervisor. When foreign competition and automation eliminated his job, he was 53 years old with a high school diploma and hands that knew how to build things America didn't want to build anymore." She turned back to Matthew, and he saw something raw and vulnerable in her expression. He died believing American manufacturing was finished, that companies like Walker Industries would always choose cheaper over better, faster over sustainable. "I became a consultant because I wanted to prove him wrong, to show that American ingenuity and quality could still compete and win. Walker Industries isn't just another client to me, Matthew. It's proof that his sacrifice meant something." The revelation reframed everything. This wasn't just a consulting engagement for Eliana. It was personal vindication, a chance to prove that American manufacturing could innovate and compete rather than simply manage decline. "What happened to him?" Matthew asked gently. "Heart attack at 58. He spent his last 5 years working retail jobs that paid half what he'd earned at the mill." Eliana's voice remained steady, but Matthew could hear the pain underneath. He was brilliant at solving mechanical problems, could fix anything with the right tools and enough time. But the world decided his kind of intelligence wasn't valuable anymore. The silence that followed was comfortable, rather than awkward. Two people sharing the weight of family legacy and professional responsibility. "We should tour the factory floor," Eliana said, returning to business with visible effort. "I need to see the equipment firsthand, talk to the workers who operate it daily." "When?" "This afternoon, if possible. I want to meet the people who'll be affected by these changes." Matthew checked his calendar. 2 o'clock? Perfect. As Eliana gathered her materials, Matthew found himself watching the efficient way she organized documents, the graceful movement of her hands as she closed her laptop. Professional appreciation, he told himself. Admiration for competence and intelligence. Nothing more complicated than that. "Mr. Walker," she said, pausing at the door. "Matthew," he corrected impulsively. "If we're going to save this company together, you should probably call me Matthew." Eliana's smile was brief but genuine. "Matthew, then. I'll see you at 2. After she left, Matthew sat alone in his office, staring at the comprehensive analysis that had upended every assumption he'd held about leadership and risk. For 8 years, he'd protected Walker Industries by making safe choices. Perhaps it was time to make a dangerous one. The factory tour that afternoon proved more revealing than Matthew had anticipated. Walking the production floor with Eliana, seeing his company through her analytical eyes, was like discovering a hidden landscape in familiar territory. "This press is from 1987, she said, running her hand along the massive metal-forming machine with unexpected tenderness. "But look at the precision work it's still producing. Your operators are artists." Jim Kowalski, a 30-year veteran who'd worked with Matthew's father, beamed with pride as he demonstrated the intricate adjustments required to maintain tolerances within thousandths of an inch. "Mr. David designed this process himself," Jim said, his weathered hands moving with practiced expertise. "Said if we could get the settings exactly right, we'd produce parts that lasted forever." Eliana asked technical questions that impressed even the most experienced operators. She understood metal fatigue, thermal expansion, the subtle interplay between speed and precision that separated excellent manufacturing from merely adequate production. With updated equipment, you could maintain these quality standards while increasing output by 30%, she told Jim. Plus, reduce the physical strain that's been wearing you down. The old man's eyes lit up. "Really? Because my back ain't what it used to be, but I hate the idea of training someone else to do this work." "Updated equipment, not replacement workers," Eliana assured him. "You'd be training the next generation while working with machinery that makes your expertise even more valuable." Matthew watched the exchange with growing admiration. Eliana wasn't just analyzing processes, she was connecting with people, understanding the human impact of every recommendation. Near the precision drilling station, disaster struck with shocking suddenness. Eliana, focused intently on the computer-controlled machinery, stepped closer to examine a specific component, just as a hydraulic line developed a sudden leak. High-pressure fluid sprayed across the exact space where she would have been standing if Matthew hadn't reacted instinctively. His arm shot out, pulling her back against his chest, just as the machinery's safety systems triggered an emergency shutdown. The factory floor filled with the sharp blast of warning sirens and the hiss of depressurizing hydraulics. For several heartbeats, they stood frozen in place. Eliana's back pressed against Matthew's chest, his arm wrapped protectively around her waist, both breathing hard from the sudden surge of adrenaline. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with concern. "No, thank you." She turned in his arms, and suddenly they were face to face. Close enough that he could see golden flecks in her dark eyes. "You saved me from hydraulic fluid can cause chemical burns," he said, but his explanation died as he realized how close they were standing, how perfectly she fit against him, how her lips were slightly parted in surprise. The maintenance team arrived with characteristic efficiency, shutting down the affected station and beginning immediate repairs. The moment shattered as workers surrounded them, checking for injuries and apologizing for the equipment failure. "I'm fine," Eliana assured everyone, but Matthew noticed the slight tremor in her hands as she smoothed her jacket. "Just startled." "We'll have that line fully inspected before tomorrow's shift," the maintenance supervisor promised Matthew. "Haven't seen a failure like that in years." As the crowd dispersed and normal production resumed, Matthew and Eliana found themselves walking toward the administrative offices in comfortable silence. The physical contact had been brief, born of emergency rather than intention, but something had shifted between them. "Quick reflexes," Eliana said as they reached the executive elevator. "Occupational hazard of growing up around manufacturing equipment," Matthew replied, but he could still feel the warmth of her body against his. The protective instinct that had moved him without conscious thought. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor stretched longer than usual, filled with awareness neither of them acknowledged aloud. When the doors opened, Eliana stepped out first, maintaining professional distance that felt more effortful than natural. "I should compile notes from today's tour," she said. "Incorporate the workers' insights into the implementation timeline." "Good idea." Matthew's voice was steadier than he felt. "We'll need their support for any changes we propose." "Absolutely." She paused outside his office. "Matthew, thank you. Not just for today, but for listening. For being willing to consider change. Thank you for showing me what change could look like." After Eliana left, Matthew stood alone in his office as the late afternoon sun painted Chicago's skyline in shades of gold and amber. The day had been professionally productive and personally unsettling in equal measure. He'd hired Eliana Thomas to analyze his company's problems. Instead, she was making him question everything: his leadership style, his risk tolerance, his carefully maintained emotional distance from the people and processes that defined Walker Industries. The physical attraction was undeniable, but manageable. Workplace relationships were career suicide, especially for someone in his position. The intellectual connection was more dangerous. The way she challenged his assumptions, shared his passion for excellence, understood the weight of family legacy. Most dangerous of all was the growing sense that Eliana Thomas might be exactly what Walker Industries needed, and exactly what he'd been missing without knowing it. His phone buzzed with a text message from Albert Collins. "Board dinner Thursday, 7 p.m., Century Club. We need to discuss your consultant's recommendations before Friday's meeting." Matthew stared at the message, recognizing it for what it was: a preemptive strike. Albert was gathering allies, building opposition to any plan that involved significant investment or risk. The battle for Walker Industries' future would be won or lost before Friday's official board meeting. And Matthew was beginning to realize that losing this fight might cost him more than his company. It might cost him the only person who'd ever seen his true potential as a leader. The modified investment plan took shape over the next week like a carefully orchestrated symphony. Matthew chose a middle path: $15 million in immediate equipment upgrades, with the remaining $10 million contingent on early results. It was still ambitious, still risky, but it represented a compromise that might actually pass a board vote. The response was immediate and encouraging. Mr. Walker, Richard Wright said during their Wednesday morning meeting, spreading quarterly projections across the conference table with barely contained excitement. I've run the numbers 3 different ways. This plan could work. More than work, it could position us as the industry leader we used to be. Sarah Mitchell, their operations director, was equally enthusiastic. The workers are already talking about it. Word travels fast on the factory floor, and for the first time in years, they're excited about coming to work. Even David Park, the board's most conservative voice, seemed intrigued by the financial modeling. The projected return on investment is impressive, he admitted during a private conversation. My engineering background tells me these upgrades are overdue. We should have done this 3 years ago. But for every ally Matthew gained, Albert Collins seemed to gather 2 opponents. The board dinner Thursday evening would be crucial. 6 votes in hand, or 6 votes against. Everything hung in the balance. Matthew found himself working later each evening, not from necessity, but because the executive floor had become the one place where he could focus entirely on strategy without his thoughts drifting to Eliana. Their daily meetings had evolved from formal consulting sessions into collaborative partnerships that felt more natural than any professional relationship he'd ever experienced. She challenged his assumptions with surgical precision, but always with respect for his expertise and judgment. She pushed him toward bolder decisions while understanding the institutional constraints he navigated. Most dangerously, she seemed to genuinely care about Walker Industries' success, not just as a consulting engagement, but as something personally meaningful. Thursday afternoon found them in his office reviewing final preparations for the board meeting. Eliana had prepared presentation materials that were masterpieces of persuasive communication, clear financial projections, compelling competitive analysis, testimonials from key employees about the modernization plan's potential. The equipment vendors are standing by, she said, checking items off her tablet with characteristic efficiency. If the board approves tomorrow, we can have installation teams here Monday morning. That fast? Matthew was impressed, despite himself. I may have taken the liberty of negotiating preliminary agreements, Eliana admitted with a slight smile. Contingent on board approval, of course. But sometimes momentum matters more than perfect process. The confession revealed something Matthew was beginning to understand about Eliana Thomas. Beneath her diplomatic professionalism was a woman who took calculated risks when she believed in the outcome. It was exactly the kind of thinking Walker Industries needed. Albert's dinner tonight, he said, voicing the concern that had been weighing on him all week. He's going to make his case against the investment plan. And you'll make yours for it. Eliana's confidence was unwavering. Matthew, you know this company better than anyone. You understand what your grandfather and father would have wanted. Trust that knowledge. The use of his first name still sent an unexpected warmth through his chest. Over the past 4 weeks, their relationship had evolved from formal consultant-client interaction to something that felt genuinely collaborative. They finished each other's sentences during strategy discussions, anticipated each other's concerns, built on each other's ideas with the kind of intellectual chemistry Matthew had never experienced. It was a professional partnership at its finest. It was also becoming something more complicated than either of them had intended. There's something else, Matthew said, suddenly needing to address the undercurrent that had been building between them. Albert's been asking questions about our working relationship, suggesting that my judgment might be compromised. Eliana's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Compromise how? He thinks I'm too influenced by outside perspectives, that I'm making decisions based on consultant recommendations rather than my own judgment. The implication hung in the air between them. Albert was questioning whether Matthew's growing respect for Eliana's expertise had crossed into something more personal. In the corporate world, such suggestions could be devastating to both their careers. Perhaps I should attend tomorrow's board meeting remotely, Eliana suggested carefully. Present the analysis via video conference to maintain appropriate distance. No. Matthew's response was immediate and firm. This company needs your expertise and I need your support. We're not going to let Albert's insinuations change how we work together. Matthew, Eliana, what we're doing here matters. It matters to the workers on that factory floor, to the families who depend on this company, to the legacy my grandfather and father built. I won't compromise that because Albert Collins wants to play political games. The passion in his voice surprised them both. For 8 years, Matthew had been cautious, measured, and diplomatic. Now he was taking a stand not just for a business strategy, but for a partnership that had shown him possibilities he'd never imagined. "All right," Eliana said quietly. "Then we see this through together." The word "together" resonated with implications neither of them voiced. They were talking about business strategy, but something deeper was being acknowledged, a connection that transcended professional boundaries without quite crossing them. "I should let you prepare for tonight," Eliana said, gathering her materials. "Remember, you're not just defending an investment plan. You're advocating for Walker Industries' future." As Eliana left, Matthew remained in his office, staring at the comprehensive analysis that represented more than business strategy. It represented a fundamental choice about who he wanted to be as a leader. His phone rang. Sharon Walker's contact photo appeared on the screen, his mother calling from Europe with impeccable timing for maximum disruption. "Matthew," Sharon's voice carried the crisp authority he'd learned to associate with important announcements. "I'm cutting my trip short. Albert Collins has contacted me with serious concerns about your recent decisions." The words hit exactly as intended, a reminder that his leadership remained subject to maternal oversight, that his judgment was still questioned by the people who supposedly supported him most. "What concerns?" Matthew asked, though he already knew the answer. "Emotional decision-making influenced by inappropriate relationships. Reckless investment strategies that threaten family legacy. The kind of choices that suggest you need guidance from more experienced voices." For 8 years, those words would have triggered immediate self-doubt. Matthew would have second-guessed his instincts, sought consensus, chosen safety over vision. Today, something different happened. "Mother," Matthew said quietly, "I appreciate your concern, but I'm confident in my decisions." The assertion of independence was small but significant. The first time Matthew had directly challenged his mother's judgment, without immediately offering justification or apology. "Matthew, we'll discuss this when I return. Don't make any irreversible commitments until then." After she hung up, Matthew sat alone with the realization that he'd just crossed a line he couldn't uncross. For the first time in his adult life, he'd chosen his own judgment over his mother's expectations. The feeling was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. As she reached the door, she paused. "Matthew, your grandfather built this company on courage and innovation. That's exactly what you're showing today." The Century Club occupied the top 2 floors of a Michigan Avenue landmark, its wood-paneled dining rooms and leather-appointed bar areas designed to evoke the gravitas of old money and established power. Matthew arrived precisely at 7, knowing that punctuality was essential when walking into what amounted to an ambush. 5 board members were already seated around Albert's preferred table, conservative voices who'd expressed skepticism about dramatic changes. The message was clear. Matthew was outnumbered from the start. "Matthew," Albert rose with practiced warmth, his silver hair perfectly styled and his charcoal suit impeccably tailored. "Thank you for joining us. We thought it important to discuss tomorrow's proposals in a more intimate setting." The dinner proceeded with the kind of diplomatic warfare Matthew had learned to navigate during his Harvard years. Surface conversation about market conditions and industry trends gradually gave way to pointed questions about his leadership decisions. "This consultant," said Patricia Hendricks, a board member who'd inherited her position through family stock ownership. Her recommendation seemed quite aggressive. "Are you certain we should be making such dramatic changes based on outside analysis?" "Eliana Thomas is one of the most qualified manufacturing consultants in the Midwest," Matthew replied carefully. "Her analysis is thorough and her recommendations are sound. No one questions her qualifications," Albert interjected smoothly. "We're simply concerned about the pace of change. Walker Industries has succeeded through steady, measured growth. This investment plan represents a fundamental shift in strategy." "The market has shifted," Matthew countered. "We can adapt or we can fail. There's no middle ground anymore." "But $25 million in capital expenditure," James Morrison, the board's newest member, shook his head. "The shareholders expect consistent returns, not speculative investments in unproven technology." The technology isn't unproven. Our competitors are using it to steal our clients. Which brings us to the real question, Albert said, leaning forward with the expression of a man playing his strongest card. Are you making this recommendation because it's best for the company, or because you've developed personal feelings about the consultant who proposed it? The accusation dropped into the conversation like a stone into still water, creating ripples of uncomfortable silence. Matthew felt heat rise in his face, not from guilt, but from fury that Albert would use such tactics. My personal feelings, Matthew said, his voice deadly quiet, are irrelevant to Walker Industries' strategic needs. I'm recommending this investment because it will save the company, period. Of course, Albert's tone suggested he didn't believe a word of it. But perception matters, Matthew. If the board believes your judgment is compromised by personal attraction to a consultant, then the board would be making a serious mistake, Matthew interrupted, standing abruptly. This conversation is over. He left the Century Club with his career hanging by a thread, and tomorrow's board meeting looking increasingly like a foregone conclusion. Albert had played his hand expertly, poisoning the well of trust that effective leadership required. Worse, the accusations weren't entirely unfair. Matthew's feelings for Eliana had evolved beyond professional respect into something more complex and dangerous. The question was whether those feelings had influenced his business judgment, or whether his business judgment had revealed feelings he'd been trying to ignore. Friday morning arrived gray and cold, with Lake Michigan churning under November skies that perfectly matched Matthew's mood. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock. 3 hours to either save Walker Industries or watch it begin its slow decline toward irrelevance. Matthew arrived at the office early, hoping to review his presentation one final time. Instead, he found Eliana waiting in his office, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "How did last night go?" she asked without preamble. "About as well as expected." Matthew closed the door and moved to his desk, needing the physical barrier to maintain professional distance. Albert made his position clear. Which was? Matthew hesitated, then decided honesty was the only option. "He thinks my judgment is compromised. That I'm supporting your recommendations for personal rather than professional reasons." Eliana went very still. "Are you?" The question hung between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. Matthew could lie, could maintain the fiction that his growing feelings for Eliana Thomas hadn't influenced his thinking about Walker Industries' future. Instead, he chose truth. "I don't know," he said quietly. "What I know is that your analysis is brilliant. Your recommendations are sound, and implementing them gives this company the best chance of survival. Whether my feelings for you influence that conclusion, I honestly can't separate the two anymore." "Feelings for me." Eliana repeated the words as if testing their weight. "Professional admiration," Matthew said carefully. "Respect for your brilliance, your integrity, your vision for what this company could become." "Is that all?" The question was asked so quietly he almost missed it. When he looked up, Eliana was studying him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Part curiosity, part vulnerability, part something that made his pulse quicken. "No," he admitted, "that's not all." The admission hung between them like a bridge finally ready to be crossed. Eliana's professional mask dissolved completely, revealing vulnerability that made Matthew's pulse quicken. She moved closer, close enough that he could see the golden flecks in her dark eyes, close enough to catch the subtle intake of her breath. "Matthew," she began, but his intercom buzzed sharply, shattering the moment like glass. "Mr. Walker, the board members are arriving early. Mr. Collins would like to speak with you privately before the meeting begins." Matthew closed his eyes briefly, understanding that Albert's early arrival meant only one thing. The opposition had solidified their position overnight. The battle for Walker Industries' future was about to become a war. "Send him in," Matthew said. As Eliana gathered her materials to leave, their eyes met for one charged moment. Everything they built together, professional partnership, intellectual connection, the dangerous attraction neither quite acknowledged, hung in the balance of the next hour. "Whatever happens in there," she said quietly, "you're fighting for the right thing." Then she was gone. leaving Matthew alone to face the man who held his company's future in his hands. Albert Collins entered the office with the measured pace of a man who knew he held all the cards. His expression was grave, almost sympathetic, as he settled into the chair across from Matthew's desk. "Matthew," he said, his voice carrying false warmth, "I'm afraid we have a problem." Albert Collins settled into his chair with the deliberate movements of a man savoring a victory not yet declared. His steel-gray hair was immaculately styled, his custom suit pressed to perfection, and his expression carried the kind of false sympathy that preceded devastating news. "Matthew," he began, his tone measured and grave, "I've spent considerable time this week speaking with our fellow board members. The consensus is troubling." Matthew forced himself to remain seated, to project calm authority despite the tension coiling in his shoulders. 8 years of boardroom battles had taught him that showing weakness invited attack. "Troubling how?" he asked. 6 members have serious concerns about this investment proposal. They feel it represents reckless gambling with shareholder assets. Albert paused meaningfully. "More concerning, they question whether your judgment has been compromised by personal considerations." The accusation hit exactly as intended, professionally devastating and personally humiliating. Matthew had spent his entire career maintaining impeccable ethical standards, never allowing personal relationships to influence business decisions. "My personal life has never interfered with my professional judgment," Matthew said coldly. "Of course not." Albert's tone suggested the opposite. "But perception matters in leadership, doesn't it? When a CEO spends increasing amounts of time with an attractive young consultant, when he begins advocating positions that align perfectly with her recommendations, when he's seen working late together, having intimate dinners." "We've never had dinner together," Matthew interrupted sharply. "Haven't you?" Albert reached into his jacket and withdrew a manila envelope. "Tuesday evening, Giuseppe's restaurant. 7:30 reservation. You and Miss Thomas, table for 2, discussing business over wine and candlelight." Matthew's blood chilled. The meeting Albert described had indeed happened, but it hadn't been personal. Eliana had suggested they continue strategy discussions over dinner when their office meeting ran late. It had been purely professional, focused entirely on implementation timelines and vendor negotiations. But Albert was right about one thing. Perception mattered. A CEO and consultant sharing dinner could easily be misconstrued as something inappropriate. "That was a business meeting," Matthew said. "I'm sure it was." Albert's smile was razor-thin. "Unfortunately, the board doesn't see it that way. They see a young CEO making risky decisions after developing feelings for his consultant." "What exactly are you suggesting, Albert?" "I'm suggesting we need to restore confidence in your leadership." Albert leaned forward, his voice taking on a paternal tone that made Matthew's skin crawl. "The board is prepared to support a modified proposal, targeted cost reductions, modest equipment upgrades, a more conservative approach to modernization." "You mean the approach that will kill this company slowly instead of quickly." "I mean the approach that protects shareholder value while maintaining operational stability." Albert's mask of sympathy began to slip. "Matthew, you're a brilliant young man, but you lack the experience to navigate this kind of crisis. Let the board guide you through this difficult period." The subtext was crystal clear. Abandon Eliana's recommendations, accept Albert's vision for Walker Industries, or face a vote of no confidence that would end Matthew's career. "And if I refuse?" Albert's expression hardened completely. "Then the board will be forced to consider whether Walker Industries needs new leadership. Patricia Hendricks has already suggested bringing in an experienced interim CEO while we conduct a comprehensive search for your replacement." The threat hit like a physical blow. Patricia Hendricks was Albert's closest ally on the board, a woman who'd inherited her position through family stock but had never worked a day in manufacturing. The idea of her choosing Matthew's replacement was nauseating. "You bastard," Matthew said quietly. "I'm a businessman protecting a 60-year-old company from reckless leadership. Albert replied without emotion. You have 30 minutes before the board meeting begins. I suggest you use that time to reconsider your priorities. After Albert left, Matthew sat alone in his office, staring out at Lake Michigan's gray expanse, while contemplating the wreckage of everything he'd worked to build. The choice was brutally simple. Betray Eliana's trust and watch Walker Industries decline gradually, or maintain his principles and lose the company immediately. Neither option was acceptable. His intercom buzzed. Mr. Walker, Miss Thomas is here. She says it's urgent. Send her in. Eliana entered with the brisk efficiency that had become familiar, but Matthew could see tension in the set of her shoulders, concern in her dark eyes. I just spoke with my business partner, she said without preamble. Someone's been making inquiries about my background, my client relationships, my professional history. Albert, Matthew said grimly, it gets worse. Eliana moved to the window, putting distance between them as if proximity itself was dangerous. They're specifically asking about my relationship with you, how much time we spend together, whether our interactions are strictly professional. The investigation Albert had hinted at was more thorough than Matthew had imagined. The man was building a comprehensive case for compromised judgment, gathering evidence to present to the board. Eliana, I need to tell you something. Matthew rose from his desk, moving closer despite her obvious attempt to maintain distance. Albert knows about Tuesday night, our dinner at Giuseppe's. Her face went pale. How could he possibly? He's having us watched, photographed. He's building a case that my judgment is compromised by personal feelings. Is it? The question was asked quietly, but it carried the weight of everything unspoken between them. Matthew could lie, could maintain professional distance and protect them both from the implications of honesty. Instead, he chose truth. Yes, he said simply. My judgment is compromised, but not in the way Albert thinks. Eliana turned from the window, her expression unreadable. Explain. I've spent my entire tenure as CEO avoiding risks that might honor their memory through bold action instead of safe preservation. Matthew took a step closer, drawn by the intensity of her attention. You've shown me what courage looks like. Not reckless gambling, but calculated risk based on thorough analysis and genuine conviction. Matthew, I'm not supporting your recommendations because I have feelings for you, he continued, the words tumbling out with desperate honesty. I have feelings for you because you've shown me who I could be as a leader. You've reminded me why this company matters, what my grandfather and father were really fighting for. The confession hung between them, like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. Eliana's professional mask had slipped completely, revealing vulnerability that made Matthew's heart ache. This is exactly what Albert wants, she said finally. Evidence that our relationship has moved beyond professional boundaries. Has it? The question was barely a whisper, but it seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Eliana moved closer, close enough that Matthew could see golden flecks in her dark eyes, close enough to catch the subtle scent of her perfume. Yes, she admitted, and that's what makes this so dangerous. Before either could explore the implications of that confession, Matthew's office door opened without warning. Richard Wright, the company's CFO, entered with the urgent energy that preceded crisis announcements. Matthew, we have a problem, Richard said, then stopped short as he noticed Eliana's proximity to Matthew. Sorry, I didn't realize you were in a meeting. Professional distance snapped back into place like a rubber band released. Eliana stepped away from Matthew with practiced efficiency, her expression returning to neutral consulting mode. What's the problem, Richard? Matthew asked, grateful for the interruption despite its awkwardness. Ford just called, postponing their contract decision pending resolution of our management stability concerns. Richard's expression was grim. Albert's been talking to our clients, Matthew. He's undermining confidence in your leadership. The news hit like a physical blow. Ford represented $15 million in potential annual revenue. Business Walker Industries desperately needed to justify any modernization investment. How many clients has he contacted? Eliana asked, her consulting instincts taking over despite the personal tension. At least 3 that we know of, Richard replied. He's presenting himself as a concerned board member, protecting client interests from reckless leadership decisions. The strategy was devastatingly effective. Albert wasn't just opposing Matthew's investment plan. He was actively sabotaging the company's reputation to force his preferred outcome. "We need to contact those clients immediately," Matthew said. "Reassure them about our stability and leadership continuity." "With what assurance?" Richard asked pointedly. "If Albert has the votes for a no-confidence motion, any promises we make about stability are meaningless." The mathematics of the situation were brutal. Without client confidence, Walker Industries couldn't justify investment in modernization. Without modernization, they couldn't compete for new clients. Albert had created a perfect trap: change nothing and decline slowly, or attempt change and face immediate collapse. "There has to be another option," Eliana said, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. "There is," Matthew said quietly. "I resign before the board meeting. Hand Albert exactly what he wants and hope he'll implement enough of your recommendations to keep the company viable." "No." Eliana's response was immediate and fierce. "You don't get to sacrifice yourself to protect his manipulation. This company needs you, Matthew. The workers believe in you. The clients trust you. Your grandfather's legacy depends on you. My grandfather's legacy will survive without me. It won't survive corporate failure. And you think Albert Collins will preserve it?" Eliana's passion was evident in every word. "He'll gut this company for short-term profits and sell the pieces to the highest bidder. Everything your family built will be gone within 5 years." The argument was interrupted by Matthew's intercom buzzing insistently. "Mr. Walker, the board members are gathering in the conference room. Mr. Collins says they're ready to begin the meeting whenever you are." Matthew looked at Richard, then at Eliana, seeing his own desperation reflected in their faces. The battle for Walker Industries' future was about to begin, and he was walking into it without sufficient allies, without leverage, without hope. "Whatever happens in there," Eliana said quietly, "don't let him destroy what you've built. This company is more than Albert Collins' political games. And if the choice is between the company's survival and my principles, then you make the choice your grandfather would have made," she replied without hesitation. "You fight." Matthew straightened his tie, checked his jacket, and prepared to walk into what might be the final boardroom battle of his career. As he reached the door, he turned back to Eliana one last time. "If this goes badly—" "It won't," she interrupted with fierce conviction. "But if it does, know that you're fighting for the right thing." The conference room was already tense when Matthew entered. 11 board members sat around the polished mahogany table, their expressions ranging from sympathetic to openly hostile. Albert commanded the head of the table with the confidence of a man who'd already won. "Matthew," Albert said with false warmth, "please, take your seat. We have important matters to discuss." As Matthew settled into his chair, he caught sight of a familiar manila envelope positioned strategically near Albert's right hand. The photographs from Tuesday night, ready to be deployed as evidence of compromised judgment. "Before we begin," Albert continued, "I think it's important to address some concerns that have been raised about recent leadership decisions and the influence of outside consultants on company strategy." Matthew's phone buzzed with a text from Richard Wright. "Check your personal email immediately. I've been investigating Albert's financial dealings on my own time. What I found will shock you. We need to move fast. He's planning something for today's meeting." Matthew's blood ran cold as he realized his most trusted ally had been conducting his own investigation. Richard Wright, the company's CFO for 12 years, had access to financial records and the analytical skills to spot patterns others might miss. His blood turned to ice as he realized what this meant. Someone knew about Albert's hidden agenda. Someone with access to information that could change everything. But opening his email during a board meeting would be obvious, suspicious, potentially damaging to his already precarious position. The choice was immediate and crucial. Maintain protocol and face certain defeat, or risk everything on information from an unknown source. Albert was already opening the manila envelope, preparing to destroy Matthew's career with manufactured scandal. Time was running out. Matthew's hand trembled almost imperceptibly as he reached for his phone. the weight of 11 pairs of eyes making every movement feel magnified. Albert was already sliding photographs from the manila envelope, arranging them with the theatrical precision of a prosecutor presenting evidence. As I was saying, Albert continued, his voice carrying the authority of a man orchestrating his opponent's downfall. Recent decisions have raised questions about whether personal considerations are influencing professional judgment. The first photograph slid across the mahogany table, Matthew and Eliana entering Giuseppe's restaurant, captured with telephoto clarity that made an innocent business meeting look clandestine and romantic. Matthew's thumb hovered over his phone screen. Opening email during a board meeting was professional suicide, unless the mysterious message contained something powerful enough to justify the risk. This photograph was taken Tuesday evening, Albert said, producing a second image of Matthew and Eliana seated across from each other, wine glasses visible, their body language suggesting intimate conversation rather than business discussion. Patricia Hendricks leaned forward, her family's 40-year investment in Walker Industries evident in her concern. Matthew, surely you understand how this appears to shareholders and clients. My father trusted this company with our family's legacy. A CEO conducting personal relationships with consultants raises serious questions about fiduciary responsibility. It was a business meeting, Matthew said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his chest. We discussed implementation timelines and vendor negotiations. Over wine? James Morrison's tone suggested he found the explanation inadequate. At a romantic restaurant known for intimate dining, the trap was perfectly constructed. Any explanation Matthew offered would sound defensive, desperate, guilty of exactly what Albert was suggesting. Meanwhile, his phone burned in his hand like a weapon he couldn't decide whether to use. The consultant's recommendations, Albert continued, producing financial projections with flourishes that made them look like evidence of conspiracy, represent the most aggressive investment strategy in company history. $25 million based on the analysis of someone who's been here for 4 weeks. Someone with 15 years of manufacturing consulting experience and a track record of successful modernization projects at companies like Cummins and Caterpillar. Richard Wright interjected, though his defense sounded weak against Albert's orchestrated presentation. Someone, Albert replied smoothly, who's clearly developed an inappropriate relationship with our CEO that's compromising his judgment. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Matthew could see the calculation in each board member's eyes. Weighing loyalty against liability, tradition against change, his 8 years of leadership against the scandal Albert was manufacturing. Have you ever had to choose between following your heart and protecting your career? What would you sacrifice to save the person you love? Share your thoughts and make sure you're subscribed for tomorrow's dramatic conclusion. I move for a vote of no confidence, Patricia Hendricks said with the finality of a judge delivering sentence. Matthew Walker has demonstrated compromised judgment that threatens shareholder value and company stability. Seconded, James Morrison added immediately. The motion crashed over Matthew like a cold wave. 6 votes. Albert had the numbers to destroy everything Matthew had worked to build. Everything his grandfather and father had sacrificed to create. His phone screen lit up with another message from the unknown number. Albert Collins owns 23% of Precision Dynamics to Shell Corporation. Check email now. Precision Dynamics, Walker Industries' largest competitor. The company that had been systematically stealing their clients, undercutting their bids, recruiting their best engineers. Matthew's blood turned to ice as the implications crashed over him. Albert wasn't just opposing modernization, he was actively working to destroy Walker Industries to benefit his secret investment. Before we vote, Matthew said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade, I have information the board needs to consider. Albert's expression flickered with the first hint of uncertainty. Matthew, this isn't the time for desperate deflection. Richard, Matthew interrupted, opening his email with deliberate precision. Could you please access the main conference screen? I'd like to share some documents with the board. Matthew, Albert's voice carried warning now. Whatever accusations you're preparing to make. Not accusations, Matthew said, scanning the email that contained everything he needed. Evidence. The conference room's main screen flickered to life as Richard connected Matthew's phone. What appeared wasn't photographs of romantic dinners or manufactured scandal. It was a comprehensive financial analysis showing Albert Collins' ownership stake in Precision Dynamics through a web of shell corporations and investment funds. "Ladies and gentlemen," Matthew said, his voice gaining strength with each word, "I present Albert Collins' actual conflict of interest. 23% ownership in our primary competitor, acquired over the past 2 years through deliberately concealed transactions." The boardroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Patricia Hendricks leaned forward, studying the documents with obvious alarm. James Morrison's expression shifted from hostile to confused. "This is preposterous," Albert sputtered, but his face had gone pale. "These documents are fabricated." "Are they?" Matthew advanced to the next screen, showing detailed transaction records. "Because they match SEC filings, bank records, and corporate registration documents, all publicly available information that someone took the time to compile." The evidence was devastating. Purchase dates that corresponded exactly with Walker Industries' client losses. Investment increases that followed their missed opportunities. A pattern of financial benefit directly tied to Walker Industries' decline. "Every client we've lost in the past year," Matthew continued, his voice gaining power as the truth emerged, "has gone to Precision Dynamics. Every contract bid we've missed has been won by Precision Dynamics. Every engineer we've lost has been recruited by Precision Dynamics." Richard Wright's expression grew complicated as he watched Albert's careful composure cracking under the weight of exposed evidence. As CFO, Richard had access to more than just corporate financial records. He understood the personal pressures that could drive good people to make terrible choices. "Matthew," Richard said quietly, "there's something else you need to understand about Albert's situation." He produced another folder, this one containing personal financial records that painted a devastating picture of private desperation hidden behind public authority. Albert's wife, Margaret, was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer 18 months ago. Richard explained with obvious reluctance. The medical bills, experimental treatments, private specialists. He spent over $2 million trying to save her life. Matthew felt his righteous anger at Albert's betrayal complicated by unexpected sympathy. The man who'd been systematically destroying Walker Industries wasn't motivated by simple greed. He was fighting to save someone he loved. "That doesn't justify what he's done," Matthew said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier edge. "No, it doesn't," Richard agreed. "But it explains how a man who served this company loyally for 8 years suddenly became willing to betray everything he'd helped build. His Precision Dynamics investment wasn't about personal enrichment. It was about funding treatments that insurance wouldn't cover." Eliana studied the financial records with analytical precision. The timeline matches. His investment in Precision Dynamics began 3 months after Margaret's diagnosis. The returns from Walker Industries' decline were directly funding experimental cancer treatments. The revelation added layers to Albert's character that transformed him from cartoon villain to tragic figure. He was a man who'd compromised his integrity for love, who'd convinced himself that betraying his professional responsibilities was justified by the possibility of saving his wife. "Where is Margaret now?" Matthew asked. Richard's expression grew even sadder. "She died 6 weeks ago. Albert's been continuing the sabotage even though the original motivation is gone. I think he doesn't know how to stop. Or maybe he's trying to honor her memory by completing what he started to save her." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of human complexity. Albert Collins wasn't a simple antagonist. He was a man who'd made terrible choices for understandable reasons, who'd lost his way while trying to save someone precious. "It doesn't change what we have to do," Matthew said finally, his voice carrying new sadness alongside necessary resolve. "But it changes how I feel about doing it." Albert, overhearing the conversation, finally spoke with the broken voice of a man whose secrets had been exposed. "She wanted me to stop," he said quietly. "Margaret knew what I was doing, knew it was wrong. In her final weeks, she begged me to confess, to make things right. But I couldn't face losing both her and my career." The confession was devastating in its honesty. Albert had continued betraying Walker Industries, not from greed or malice, but from the kind of desperate momentum that comes from having already sacrificed everything for a cause that ultimately failed. "Albert," Matthew said with unexpected gentleness, "why didn't you come to me? We could have helped with medical expenses, provided support, found a way to—" "Because I was ashamed," Albert interrupted. "Ashamed that a man my age couldn't provide for his wife's medical needs. Ashamed that I had to choose between her life and my integrity. Ashamed that I was weak when she needed me to be strong." The human tragedy behind the corporate betrayal was complete. Albert Collins had destroyed his professional legacy and personal integrity in a desperate attempt to save someone he loved. And even that sacrifice had ultimately failed. Sarah Mitchell, the operations director, spoke for the first time. "Albert, is this true? Do you have financial interest in our competitor?" Albert's careful composure was cracking like ice under pressure. "My personal investments are completely separate from my board responsibilities." "Are they?" Matthew displayed another screen showing communications between Albert and Precision Dynamics executives. "Because these emails suggest extensive coordination between your board positions and your investment strategy." The smoking gun was a message from Albert to Precision Dynamics CEO. "Walker Industries board meeting Friday. If modernization plan fails, they'll be forced to implement cost-cutting measures that will accelerate client defection." Perfect timing for aggressive acquisition strategy. The silence that followed was deafening. 11 board members stared at evidence of betrayal so comprehensive it defied explanation. Albert Collins, the respected voice of conservative wisdom, had been systematically sabotaging the company for personal profit. "Who sent you this information?" Albert demanded, desperation creeping into his voice. "Someone who cares about Walker Industries' actual survival," Matthew replied. "Someone who understood that you've been manipulating this board to destroy the company you were sworn to protect." The revelation changed everything. The modernization plan Albert had opposed wasn't reckless gambling. It was exactly what Walker Industries needed to compete against the sabotage he'd been orchestrating. "I move to remove Albert Collins from the board immediately," Richard Wright said, his voice heavy with sadness rather than anger, "and to authorize a full investigation of his conflicts of interest, while recommending that any criminal referrals consider the extenuating circumstances of his situation." The motion was both just and merciful, holding Albert accountable for his betrayal, while acknowledging the human tragedy that had motivated it. "I also move," Matthew added with quiet conviction, "that Walker Industries establish the Pay Employee Medical Assistance Fund to ensure no one else faces the choice between family loyalty and professional integrity." The proposal transformed Albert's tragedy into something constructive, a legacy that might prevent future desperation rather than simply punishing past mistakes. Albert's eyes filled with tears as he realized that even in his moment of professional destruction, the people he'd betrayed were trying to honor his wife's memory through positive change. "Thank you," he whispered. "Margaret she would have approved." "Seconded," Sarah Mitchell added without hesitation. The vote was unanimous, 10 in favor, 1 abstention from a visibly shaken Patricia Hendricks. Albert Collins' 8-year campaign to control Walker Industries was over, but the damage he'd inflicted wasn't easily repaired. "Matthew," David Park said quietly, "even with Albert's manipulation exposed, we still face the same fundamental challenge. Client confidence is shaken. Revenue projections are uncertain. The modernization investment remains risky." The truth was sobering. Exposing Albert's betrayal didn't automatically restore the contracts he'd helped steal or repair the reputation he'd damaged. Walker Industries still needed $25 million in investment to become competitive, still faced an uncertain future in a rapidly changing market. "There's something else," Matthew said, advancing to the final screen in his email. "Precision Dynamics has made an acquisition offer for Walker Industries, 60 cents on the dollar, contingent on continued operational decline." The buyout offer was Albert's endgame. Destroy Walker Industries' value through sabotage, then purchase it cheaply through his competitor investment. The workers would lose their jobs. The company would lose its independence. and Albert would profit from every aspect of the betrayal. "Over my dead body," Richard Wright said with quiet fury. "The choice is ours," Matthew said, looking around the table at faces that reflected his own determination. "We can accept decline and eventual acquisition, or we can fight for the company my grandfather built." The vote on the modernization plan was different this time, informed by truth rather than manipulation, focused on actual survival rather than manufactured scandal. All in favor of the $25 million modernization investment? 9 hands rose immediately. Patricia Hendricks hesitated, then slowly raised hers as well. "Motion carries," Matthew said, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders that he'd carried for months. "We move forward together." As the board members filed out of the conference room, discussing implementation details and legal actions against Albert's misconduct, Matthew found himself alone with the aftermath of the most intense hour of his professional life. But something had shifted inside him during that confrontation. For 8 years, Matthew had deferred to others' judgment, his mother's caution, Albert's conservative wisdom, the board's collective risk aversion. Today, for the first time, he'd trusted his own instincts completely. The feeling was both terrifying and exhilarating. "Richard," Matthew said as his CFO gathered documents from the conference table, "I need to ask you something personal." Richard Wright looked up with the patience of a man who'd served 3 generations of Walker leadership. "What's on your mind? Have I been too cautious as CDO? Too focused on protecting what we have instead of building what we could have?" The question surprised Richard. Matthew rarely asked for personal feedback about his leadership style. For 8 years, he'd made decisions with careful deliberation, but little self-examination. "Matthew, what's brought this on? Honest feedback. Have I been letting fear override judgment, managing my mother's voice instead of my own convictions?" Richard set down his papers, recognizing the significance of the moment. "Your grandfather took calculated risks based on vision and analysis. Your mother prefers certainty and established patterns. You've been trying to honor both approaches, which sometimes means choosing neither," Matthew said with new understanding. "Exactly. And now," Matthew looked around the conference room, where he'd just made the most important decision of his professional life, supporting innovation over safety, partnership over isolation, courage over fear. "Now I need to decide what kind of leader I want to be." His phone buzzed with another message from the unknown number. "Congratulations. Walker Industries deserves leadership with integrity. The evidence came from someone who believes in what you're building." Matthew stared at the message, wondering who had access to such comprehensive information about Albert's financial dealings. The timing was too perfect, the documentation too thorough to be coincidental. Before he could analyze the mystery further, the conference room door opened. Eliana entered with the cautious energy of someone unsure what devastation she might find. "How did it go?" she asked, though his expression had already given her the answer. "Albert's gone. His conflicts of interest are exposed. The modernization plan is approved." Matthew felt exhaustion and relief warring in his chest. "We won." "How?" Eliana moved closer, her professional mask slipping to reveal genuine amazement. "Someone sent me evidence of Albert's investment in Precision Dynamics. Complete financial records, communication logs, even their acquisition strategy." Matthew showed her the email thread. "Someone who wanted Walker Industries to survive." Eliana studied the messages with the analytical focus that had first impressed him. "The information is incredibly detailed. Whoever compiled this had access to both corporate records and private communications. Any idea who might have that kind of access? Someone with investigative resources. Someone who's been watching Albert for a while." Eliana paused, a thought occurring to her. Someone who cares about manufacturing industry integrity. The possibility hung between them, that someone had been conducting their own investigation of Albert's activities, waiting for the right moment to expose his betrayal. But the identity of their anonymous ally seemed less important than the result. "Eliana," Matthew said, suddenly needing to address the personal implications of everything that had happened. "What Albert said about my judgment being compromised, was he wrong?" she interrupted quietly. The question carried all the weight of their unspoken connection, all the professional boundaries they'd been carefully navigating, all the attraction they'd been trying to ignore. No, Matthew admitted, he wasn't wrong. My judgment is compromised, but not in the way he claimed. How then? Matthew moved closer, drawn by the vulnerability in her expression. The way afternoon sunlight from the conference room windows brought out golden highlights in her dark skin. For 8 years, I've made decisions based on fear, he said. Fear of risk, fear of failure, fear of changing anything my grandfather built. You've shown me what courage looks like. Not reckless gambling, but calculated risk based on deep analysis and genuine conviction. Matthew, I'm not supporting your recommendations because I have feelings for you, he continued, the words he'd been holding back finally spilling out. I have feelings for you because you've reminded me who I could be as a leader. You've shown me possibilities I never imagined. The confession hung in the air between them, like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. Eliana's professional composure had completely dissolved, revealing the woman beneath the consultant, brilliant, passionate, vulnerable in ways that made Matthew's heart ache. This changes everything, she said quietly. Does it have to? Before Eliana could answer, the conference room door burst open. Richard Wright entered with the urgent energy that preceded crisis announcements. Matthew, we have a problem, he said, then stopped short as he noticed the intimate distance between Matthew and Eliana. Sorry, I thought you were alone. Professional boundaries snapped back into place, but the moment had already revealed too much. Richard's expression showed he understood exactly what he'd interrupted. What's the problem? Matthew asked, forcing his voice to remain steady. Sharon Walker is here, Richard said grimly. Your mother flew back from Europe early. She's demanding an emergency meeting about the board changes and the modernization plan. She seems upset. Matthew's blood chilled. His mother had impeccable timing for inserting herself into situations where her presence would cause maximum disruption. Her early return from Europe meant someone had contacted her about the board meeting, possibly Albert himself. Where is she now? Matthew asked. Your office, with a team of lawyers. The words hit like a physical blow. Sharon Walker with legal representation meant only one thing. She was preparing to challenge the board's decisions, possibly even Matthew's authority as CEO. She can't overturn board votes, Eliana said, but uncertainty colored her voice. She can if she's discovered some legal basis for challenging them, Matthew replied grimly. My mother doesn't travel with lawyers unless she's planning war. As they moved toward the elevator, Matthew's phone buzzed with yet another message from the unknown number. Sharon Walker has been in contact with Albert Collins. She's planning to invoke family trust provisions to override board decisions. You have approximately 10 minutes before she files injunction paperwork. Matthew showed the message to Eliana and Richard, watching their faces pale as the implications became clear. Family trust provisions? Eliana asked. The original company charter includes emergency powers for family members in cases of board misconduct, Matthew explained. It was designed to protect against hostile takeovers, but it could be used to override today's decisions. Can she do that? Richard asked. If she can prove the board acted against company interests, yes, she could suspend the modernization plan, reinstate Albert, even call for new leadership. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt like ascending to an execution. Everything they'd fought for, everything they'd won, could be undone by legal maneuvering and family politics. As the doors opened, Matthew could hear his mother's voice through his office door, cold, authoritative, absolutely furious. Whatever happens, Eliana said quietly, we don't let her destroy what you've built. Matthew straightened his shoulders and prepared to face the woman who'd shaped his entire understanding of leadership, responsibility, and the price of weakness. The final battle for Walker Industries was about to begin. Sharon Walker commanded Matthew's office like a general surveying a battlefield. At 62, she possessed the kind of elegant authority that came from decades of wealth and the absolute certainty that her opinion mattered most in any room. Her silver hair was styled in a perfect chignon, her designer suit was impeccably tailored, and her ice blue eyes so similar to Matthew's, held the cold fury of a woman whose careful plans had been disrupted. 3 lawyers flanked her position behind Matthew's desk, their briefcases open and documents spread across the mahogany surface with military precision. The message was clear. This wasn't a family discussion. It was a corporate coup. "Matthew," Sharon said, without turning from the window where she'd been studying Lake Michigan's gray expanse. "I trust you can explain why I received an urgent call from Albert Collins describing your board's reckless behavior." "Albert Collins was removed from the board for conflicts of interest," Matthew replied, forcing his voice to remain steady despite the fury building in his chest. "He's been systematically sabotaging this company for personal profit." "So I've been told." Sharon finally turned, her expression carrying the kind of disappointment that had shaped Matthew's childhood. "What I haven't been told is why you think a 2-week consultant's recommendations justify $25 million in speculative investment." The emphasis on 2-week consultant was deliberate, designed to minimize Eliana's expertise and maximize the appearance of Matthew's reckless judgment. Sharon Walker had perfected the art of undermining opposition through subtle character assassination. "Because her analysis is correct," Matthew said. "Walker Industries needs modernization to survive." "Walker Industries needs stable leadership," Sharon countered smoothly. "Something it apparently lacks when you're making emotional decisions based on personal attractions." The accusation hit exactly as intended, publicly humiliating Matthew while positioning Sharon as the voice of rational authority. Eliana stepped forward with diplomatic precision. "Mrs. Walker, I'm Eliana Thomas. Perhaps I could address your concerns about the modernization recommendations." "Miss Thomas," Sharon's tone could have frozen Lake Michigan. "I'm sure your intentions are professional, but the appearance of impropriety is nearly as damaging as actual misconduct. A consultant conducting personal relationships with clients raises serious questions about judgment and ethics." The attack was surgical in its precision. Sharon wasn't accusing Eliana of actual misconduct. She was suggesting that perception alone was sufficient grounds for dismissing both her recommendations and Matthew's leadership. "There's no personal relationship," Eliana said firmly. "Our interactions have been strictly professional." "Have they?" One of Sharon's lawyers produced a tablet displaying photographs from Tuesday evening's dinner. "Because these images suggest otherwise." The same photos Albert had used, now weaponized by Sharon's legal team. Matthew felt the trap closing around them with suffocating precision. "That was a business meeting," Matthew said. "At a romantic restaurant?" Sharon's expression suggested she found the explanation insulting to her intelligence. "Matthew, I raised you to understand that leadership requires sacrifice. Personal desires must always be subordinate to institutional responsibility." The philosophy that had shaped Matthew's entire approach to leadership: emotional distance, calculated decisions, personal sacrifice for corporate good. For 8 years, he'd followed that guidance, making safe choices that protected the company while limiting its potential. "Mother," Matthew said, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice, "Walker Industries is dying. The safe choices you're advocating will kill it slowly, but certainly. And the risky choices you're making will kill it quickly," Sharon replied without emotion. "Which is why I'm invoking emergency family trust provisions to suspend today's board decisions pending comprehensive review." The words hit like a physical blow. Sharon's lawyers began arranging documents with practiced efficiency. Legal paperwork that could undo everything the board had decided, everything Matthew had fought to achieve. "You can't override a unanimous board vote," Richard Wright said. But uncertainty colored his voice. "Actually, she can," one of Sharon's lawyers replied with professional satisfaction. "The original company charter includes provisions for family intervention in cases of board decisions that threaten long-term corporate stability." "Albert's sabotage threatened stability," Matthew said desperately. "Not our response to it. Albert's alleged misconduct doesn't validate reckless investment strategies," Sharon replied coolly. "The family trust has a fiduciary responsibility to protect shareholder value, not enable emotional decision-making." The legal maneuvering was devastatingly effective. Even if Albert's betrayal was proven in court, Sharon could argue that the board's response was disproportionate, that Matthew's judgment was compromised by personal considerations. "Mrs. Walker," Eliana said, her voice carrying steel beneath diplomatic courtesy, "with respect. Your son has demonstrated exceptional leadership during this crisis. The modernization plan represents exactly the kind of strategic thinking this company needs." "Miss Thomas," Sharon replied with glacial calm, "I'm sure you believe that. Unfortunately, your opinion carries no weight in family trust decisions." The dismissal was complete and humiliating. Eliana's expertise, her brilliant analysis, her potential to save Walker Industries, all reduced to irrelevant noise by Sharon's legal authority. Matthew felt something snap inside him. 8 years of deference to his mother's judgment. 8 years of subordinating his instincts to her expectations. 8 years of managing by fear, rather than leading with conviction. "Stop," he said quietly. The single word carried such unexpected authority that conversation halted. Sharon's lawyers looked up from their documents. Richard stared at Matthew with surprise. Eliana watched with something that might have been pride. "Mother," Matthew continued, his voice gaining strength, "you're wrong." Sharon's expression flickered with the first hint of uncertainty. In 8 years as CEO, Matthew had never directly challenged her judgment, never asserted his authority against her wishes. "About the investment plan?" she asked carefully. "About everything." Matthew moved to his desk, confronting the array of legal documents designed to destroy his leadership. "About risk, about leadership, about what this company needs to survive." "Matthew, I spent 8 years following your advice, making safe decisions, avoiding risk, protecting what grandfather built, rather than expanding it." Matthew's voice carried newfound conviction. "And where has that gotten us? Declining revenue, fleeing clients, obsolete equipment, demoralized workers." "It's gotten you steady profits and stable operations," Sharon replied, but her tone had lost some of its earlier certainty. "It's gotten us exactly what Albert Collins wanted, a weakened company ripe for acquisition." Matthew picked up one of the legal documents, studying the language designed to strip his authority. "This injunction isn't protecting Walker Industries, Mother. It's finishing what Albert started." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a fired weapon. Sharon's carefully constructed justification, protecting family interests from reckless leadership, suddenly looked like collaboration with the very forces that threatened the company's survival. "That's a serious charge," one of Sharon's lawyers said. "It's an accurate charge," Matthew replied. "Albert spent 2 years sabotaging this company to benefit his investment in our competitor. Now my mother wants to complete his work by preventing the modernization that could save us." Sharon's composure cracked slightly. "I would never." "Then withdraw the injunction," Matthew said simply. "Trust the board's judgment. Trust my leadership. Trust that I know what's best for the company I've spent 8 years leading." The challenge was direct and unmistakable. Sharon could proceed with legal maneuvering that would protect her control while potentially destroying the company, or she could demonstrate actual faith in her son's judgment. "The risk is too great," she said finally. $25 million based on 4 weeks of analysis is exactly what this company needs," Eliana interrupted, her professional restraint finally breaking. "Mrs. Walker, with all due respect, your son's judgment isn't compromised. It's finally unclouded by fear." Sharon turned the full force of her disapproval on Eliana. "Miss Thomas, your personal interest in this outcome is obvious." "My personal interest," Eliana replied with quiet intensity, "is seeing American manufacturing companies survive and thrive instead of declining into irrelevance. Walker Industries represents everything that's still possible in this industry, and my son represents your best chance of implementing recommendations that serve your consulting firm's interests." The accusation was devastating in its implications, that Eliana was manipulating Matthew for professional gain, that her recommendations served her agenda rather than Walker Industries' needs. "That's enough," Matthew said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Mother, you can question my judgment, challenge my decisions, even override my authority. But you will not impugn Ileana's integrity. The defense was immediate, passionate, and completely inappropriate for a CEO protecting a consultant. Every person in the room understood the implications. Matthew's feelings for Ileana had moved far beyond professional admiration. Sharon's expression hardened with vindicated disapproval. Matthew, you've just proven my point. Your judgment is compromised by personal feelings that have no place in corporate leadership. You're right, Matthew said, surprising everyone, including himself. My judgment is compromised, but not in the way you think. He moved closer to Ileana, close enough that his intentions became unmistakable to everyone watching. Since taking over the company, I've let caution masquerade as wisdom, avoiding risks, preventing failures, desperately trying not to disappoint you. Matthew's voice carried the weight of long-suppressed truth. Ileana Thomas has shown me what courageous leadership looks like. Not reckless gambling, but calculated risk based on thorough analysis and genuine conviction. Matthew, Sharon began, but he continued without pause. I'm not supporting her recommendations because I have feelings for her. I have feelings for her because she's reminded me who I could be as a leader, what this company could become with proper vision and courage. The confession was complete, public, professionally suicidal. Every person in the room now understood that Matthew Walker was willing to risk his career, his family relationships, and his company's future for a woman he'd known for 4 weeks. It was also the most honest thing he'd ever said. This is exactly what I was afraid of, Sharon said with cold satisfaction. Emotional decision-making that threatens everything we've built. No, Mother. Fear of emotional decision-making is what's been killing what we built. Matthew straightened his shoulders, finding strength he'd never known he possessed. Grandfather didn't build Walker Industries by playing it safe. He took risks, made bold decisions, trusted his instincts, even when everyone said he was wrong. Your grandfather also understood the difference between calculated risk and emotional impulse. So do I. Matthew picked up Ileana's comprehensive analysis, holding it like evidence of his sanity rather than his recklessness. This isn't an emotional impulse, Mother. This is the most thorough strategic analysis Walker Industries has ever received. Ileana Thomas is the most qualified manufacturing consultant in the Midwest, and her recommendations represent our best chance of survival. Survival based on $25 million in speculative investment. Survival based on courage, Matthew interrupted. The courage to innovate rather than stagnate, to lead rather than manage, to build rather than simply preserve. The philosophical divide was complete and unbridgeable. Sharon represented 8 years of conservative management that had protected Walker Industries while limiting its potential. Matthew was advocating for the kind of bold leadership that had originally built the company. I'm proceeding with the injunction, Sharon said finally. The family trust cannot allow emotional decision-making to jeopardize 60 years of family legacy. Then you'll be destroying the legacy you claim to protect, Matthew replied with quiet conviction. And you'll be doing it in partnership with the same man who betrayed us for personal profit. Before Sharon could respond, Matthew's phone buzzed with another message from their mysterious ally. Sharon Walker received $2.3 million from Albert Collins 3 days ago. Payment for consulting services regarding board management. Check your email. Matthew's blood turned to ice as he read the message. His mother hadn't returned from Europe because of concern for Walker Industries. She'd returned because Albert had paid her to intervene. To complete the sabotage he could no longer orchestrate from inside the board. Mother, Matthew said, his voice deadly quiet. Did Albert Collins pay you to file this injunction? Sharon's face went pale. That's a ridiculous accusation. Is it? Matthew was already opening his email, displaying financial records on the conference room screen. Because these bank records show a $2.3 million payment from Albert's accounts to yours 3 days ago. The silence that followed was deafening. Sharon's lawyers studied the documents with obvious alarm. Richard Wright's expression shifted from confusion to horror. Ileana watched with the fascination of someone seeing corporate corruption exposed in real time. Consulting fees, Sharon said weakly, for strategic advice about board management. Strategic advice about destroying your son's leadership, Matthew replied. "Mother, you took money from the man who's been sabotaging our company." The revelation changed everything. Sharon's legal intervention wasn't maternal protection. It was paid obstruction, the final phase of Albert's campaign to destroy Walker Industries. "I was protecting the family's interests." "You were protecting Albert's interests," Matthew said with devastating clarity, "and destroying mine in the process." The room erupted in shocked conversation as the implications became clear. Sharon Walker, the family matriarch whose judgment Matthew had trusted for 8 years, had been compromised by the same man who'd betrayed the company board. "Mrs. Walker," Richard Wright said, his voice shaking with anger, "if you've accepted payment to obstruct legitimate board decisions, that constitutes corporate interference, possibly criminal conspiracy." Sharon's carefully constructed authority was crumbling like a house built on sand. Her lawyers were already whispering urgently about legal liability and client protection. "The injunction is withdrawn," one of the lawyers announced abruptly. "Our client needs time to review these allegations and consider her position." As Sharon's legal team gathered their documents with desperate efficiency, Matthew found himself facing the wreckage of family relationships and corporate governance in equal measure. "Matthew," Sharon said quietly, her voice stripped of its earlier authority, "you don't understand the pressures." "I understand betrayal," he replied without emotion. "Just like Albert, you put personal gain ahead of family loyalty." "That's not what happened." "That's exactly what happened." Matthew's voice carried the weight of 8 years' disappointment finally given voice. "You sold out your son's leadership for Albert Collins' money." The accusation was brutal but accurate. Sharon had accepted payment from Walker Industries' greatest enemy to obstruct the very decisions that might save the company. As Sharon left with her legal team, the office fell into stunned silence. The battle for Walker Industries' future had been won, but the personal cost was devastating. "I'm sorry about your mother," Eliana said quietly. "Don't be," Matthew replied, though his voice betrayed the pain of family betrayal. "She made her choice. Now I need to make mine." He turned to face Eliana directly, seeing her not as a consultant or business partner, but as the woman who'd helped him find courage he'd never known he possessed. "Eliana," he said, his voice carrying newfound certainty, "I need to tell you something." Before he could continue, the office door burst open once more. This time it was Sarah Mitchell, the operations director, her face flushed with excitement and exertion. "Matthew," she said breathlessly, "you need to see this. General Motors just called. They want to reinstate our contract immediately." The news hit like a lightning bolt. The client whose defection had started this entire crisis was returning, presumably because Albert's sabotage had been exposed. "How is that possible?" Richard asked. "Someone sent them evidence of Albert's coordination with Precision Dynamics," Sarah explained. "They realized their contract termination was based on manufactured concerns about our capabilities." Matthew's mysterious ally had struck again, this time restoring the relationship that represented 40% of Walker Industries' annual revenue. "There's more," Sarah continued. "Ford, Chrysler, and 2 other clients we thought we'd lost forever are all requesting meetings about renewed contracts. Someone's been very busy exposing Albert's manipulation." The reversal was almost too perfect to believe. In one afternoon, Walker Industries had gone from facing bankruptcy to potentially reclaiming its position as an industry leader. "Who's been sending this information?" Eliana asked, voicing the question that had been haunting Matthew all day. Matthew's phone buzzed with a final message from the unknown number. "Walker Industries deserves leadership with integrity. Your grandfather would be proud. Walker Industries deserves leadership with integrity." The final pieces are falling into place. Matthew stared at the message, his mind reeling from the implications. Someone had been orchestrating this entire revelation, timing each disclosure for maximum impact. Someone who knew about his feelings for Eliana. Someone who apparently approved of their relationship enough to call it a wedding gift. "Matthew?" Eliana's voice seemed to come from very far away. "What does it say?" He showed her the message, watching her face transform from confusion to wonder, to something that might have been joy. "Wedding gift?" she whispered. Before Matthew could respond, before he could process the implications of a mysterious ally who seemed to know his heart better than he did himself, his phone rang with an incoming call. The caller ID showed a name that made his blood run cold. Thomas Walker. His grandfather had been dead for 9 years. Matthew's hand trembled as he stared at the impossible caller ID. Thomas Walker, his grandfather's name displayed on his phone screen, like a message from beyond the grave, defying everything rational while demanding an answer. "That's not possible," Eliana whispered, reading the display over his shoulder. "No," Matthew agreed, but his thumb hovered over the answer button. "It's not." The phone continued ringing, each tone seeming to echo in the sudden silence of his office. Richard Wright and Sarah Mitchell watched with expressions of growing alarm, clearly recognizing the name that had shaped Walker Industries' entire history. On the 5th ring, Matthew answered. "Hello?" "Matthew." The voice was warm, familiar, impossible, the same gravelly tone that had told bedtime stories about manufacturing innovations and business adventures. The same gentle authority that had guided Matthew through childhood decisions and teenage confusion. "I think it's time we had a conversation." "Grandfather?" The word escaped as barely a whisper. "Not quite, son, but close enough for our purposes." There was amusement in the voice now, along with something that sounded like pride. "Meet me in the factory archive room, 3rd floor, southeast corner. Come alone, and bring this Thomas with you." The line went dead. Matthew stared at his phone, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. His grandfather had been dead for 9 years. He'd attended the funeral, delivered the eulogy, inherited the company, and the responsibility that came with it. Yet the voice had been unmistakably Thomas Walker's, not a recording or imitation, but the actual cadence and warmth that Matthew remembered from childhood. "Matthew," Richard said carefully. "Who was that?" "I don't know," Matthew replied honestly. "But whoever it is knows about the archive room." The factory archive occupied a forgotten corner of Walker Industries' 3rd floor, housing 60 years of company records, photographs, and historical documents. Few current employees even knew it existed, and fewer still had access to the climate-controlled space where Thomas Walker's legacy was preserved. "We should call security," Sarah suggested, but her voice lacked conviction. "No," Matthew said, surprising himself with certainty. "If someone wanted to hurt us, they've had plenty of opportunities today. Whoever's been sending information has been helping, not hindering." "The mysterious ally," Eliana said with sudden understanding. "Someone who's been protecting Walker Industries from the inside." The pieces were beginning to form a pattern, though the picture remained frustratingly incomplete. Someone with access to Albert's financial records, Sharon's bank accounts, and corporate communications going back years. Someone who knew about the archive room, who could manipulate caller ID systems, who understood family dynamics well enough to time revelations for maximum impact. "We go together," Matthew decided, but carefully. The elevator ride to the 3rd floor felt longer than usual, weighted with questions neither Matthew nor Eliana could answer. Richard had texted specific instructions. "Archive room, 3rd floor. Come alone with Miss Thomas. I have everything we need." The archive room's heavy oak door stood slightly ajar, warm light spilling into the corridor from inside. Matthew pushed it open slowly, revealing Richard Wright standing behind Thomas Walker's preserved desk, surrounded by boxes of documents, computer printouts, and what appeared to be months of investigative work. "Richard," Matthew said, relief flooding his voice. "Thank God, I thought." "You thought I was going crazy with mysterious messages." Richard smiled grimly, gesturing to the comprehensive display of evidence covering every surface. "I've been investigating Albert for 8 months, Matthew. Ever since I noticed his recommendations consistently benefited Precision Dynamics." 8 months of investigation, Eliana said, studying the evidence. "This is incredibly thorough." "Albert's been sloppy about separating his board duties from his investment activities," Richard explained. "The pattern became obvious once I started tracking it." Matthew studied the evidence with growing amazement. Bank records, corporate filings, email communications, investment disclosures, everything needed to prove Albert's betrayal, compiled with the methodical precision of a trained forensic accountant. "How did you access Albert's private communications?" Matthew asked. "I didn't," Richard replied. "I didn't need to. Albert's been sloppy about separating his board duties from his investment activities. Every recommendation he's made to this board has suspiciously benefited Precision Dynamics." The pattern is clear once you know what to look for. The timing of your revelations today, Eliana said with analytical precision, was perfect. How did you know to act now? Richard's expression grew serious. Because I discovered yesterday that Albert was planning to force a vote of no confidence today. He's been building coalition support for weeks, using manufactured scandal about your relationship to justify removing Matthew from leadership. You've been protecting us, Matthew realized. I've been protecting Walker Industries, Richard corrected firmly. This company survived the Great Depression, 2 recessions, and countless industry changes. I wasn't going to let Albert Collins destroy it for personal profit. The revelation reframed everything. Richard hadn't been passively loyal. He'd been actively investigating, building a case, waiting for the right moment to expose the truth. What happens now? Matthew asked. Now we present this evidence to the board, Richard said simply. Albert's financial conflicts are undeniable. His coordination with Precision Dynamics is documented. His manipulation of board sentiment is provable. And my mother's involvement? Richard's expression grew sad. Sharon's bank records show the payment from Albert 3 days ago. I'm sorry, Matthew, but the evidence is clear. She accepted money to obstruct legitimate board decisions. The truth was devastating but necessary. Richard Wright, through months of careful investigation and unwavering loyalty, had uncovered the conspiracy that threatened everything Matthew's family had built. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Matthew asked. Because I needed ironclad proof, Richard replied. Accusations against board members require absolute certainty. And because I needed to wait until Albert made his move. Now he's committed to a course of action based on false assumptions about our ignorance. The other evidence, Eliana said. Studying documents about client communications. How did you discover Albert's contacts with our clients? Corporate phone records. Richard explained. Board members have company phones for official business. Albert's been using his to contact our clients, but he's been claiming the calls were about board oversight when they were actually undermining confidence in Matthew's leadership. The systematic nature of Albert's betrayal was breathtaking in scope. For years, he'd been positioning himself to profit from Walker Industries' decline, while publicly advocating for the policies that would cause that decline. There's something else, Richard said, producing a final folder. Precision Dynamics has prepared an acquisition offer for Walker Industries. 60 cents on the dollar, contingent on continued operational decline. The buyout offer was Albert's endgame. Destroy Walker Industries' value through sabotage, then purchase it cheaply through his competitor investment. Richard, Matthew said, emotion thickening his voice, you saved this company. We saved this company, Richard corrected, looking at both Matthew and Eliana. Your leadership, her expertise, my investigation. That's what partnership looks like. Richard Wright stood in the doorway, his face flushed with exertion and excitement. Matthew, he said breathlessly, you need to come to the conference room immediately. We have visitors who say they represent General Motors' board of directors. They want to discuss a partnership that could triple our annual revenue. Triple our revenue? Eliana repeated with analytical precision. They're talking about exclusive supplier status for their Ultium battery platform and next-generation EV drivetrain components, Richard explained. 5-year contract, guaranteed minimums, technology sharing agreements. It's everything we've hoped for. As they moved toward the elevator, Matthew's hand brushed against Eliana's. Without conscious thought, their fingers intertwined, and he was struck by how perfectly her hand fit in his. How the simple contact seemed to calm the chaos in his mind. Professional boundaries dissolved with that single touch, replaced by something infinitely more honest and dangerous. Ready for our next challenge? He asked. Together? She replied. Always. The elevator doors opened to reveal Sarah Mitchell, waiting with an expression of barely contained excitement. Matthew, there's more, she said as they stepped inside. Ford, Stellantis, Toyota, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, and Audi have all requested meetings about potential partnerships. Someone's been very busy promoting Walker Industries' capabilities. How is this possible? Eliana wondered aloud. Truth finds a way, Matthew replied. thinking of his grandfather's belief that integrity always wins in the end. The elevator doors opened to reveal the conference room filled with executives in expensive suits, all of them apparently eager to discuss partnerships that could transform Walker Industries from a struggling survivor into an industry powerhouse. As Matthew stepped forward to greet General Motors representatives, his phone buzzed with a text from Richard. GM called because of our evidence package. Albert's sabotage convinced them to terminate. But the truth convinced them to return. 5 other clients want meetings this week. The reversal was stunning, but logical. Once clients understood that their concerns about Walker Industries had been manufactured by a board member with competing interests, their confidence returned quickly. The weeks that followed moved with the precision of the new machinery Walker Industries was installing. Albert Collins pled guilty to securities fraud in exchange for a reduced sentence that considered his wife's medical situation. Sharon Walker quietly settled her legal issues and sold her stock back to the family trust. The modernization proceeded exactly as Eliana had projected. The first Mazik CNC systems came online in December, followed by the DMG Mori lathes in January. By March, production efficiency had increased 28%. By May, they'd hired back every worker who'd been laid off by previous cost-cutting measures, plus 35 new engineers. 6 months later, Walker Industries stock hit an all-time high as Matthew stood at the podium of the Chicago Manufacturing Excellence Awards ceremony, accepting recognition as CEO of the Year for the most dramatic corporate turnaround in recent memory. The audience of industry leaders, investors, and workers rose in sustained applause as he held the crystal trophy that represented validation of everything he'd fought to achieve. But Matthew's eyes weren't on the crowd or the award. They were on Eliana Thomas, seated in the front row wearing a midnight blue dress that took his breath away, her smile radiant with pride for what they'd accomplished together. The phone call from David Walker had lasted exactly 30 seconds that day 6 months ago, just long enough for his father's impossible voice to say, "I'm proud of the man you've become, son. Take care of the family business, and it will take care of you." Then silence, leaving Matthew with questions that would never be answered and peace that would never be questioned. "Ladies and gentlemen," Matthew said into the microphone, his voice carrying the confidence that had replaced 8 years of cautious leadership, "This award doesn't belong to me alone. It belongs to every worker at Walker Industries who believed in change when change seemed impossible. It belongs to every client who trusted us to modernize while maintaining the quality standards that have defined our company for 60 years." The modernization had exceeded even Eliana's optimistic projections. The Mazak CNC systems and DNG Muri precision equipment had increased production efficiency by 43% while reducing workplace injuries to near zero. Employee satisfaction scores reached historic highs as workers found themselves operating cutting-edge machinery that enhanced rather than replaced their expertise. Most remarkably, Walker Industries had become a destination employer, attracting the kind of engineering talent that had been fleeing to competitors for years. But most importantly, Matthew continued, his eyes never leaving Eliana's face, "This award belongs to the consultant who had the courage to tell a stubborn CEO that he was killing his own company. Someone who showed me that the difference between good leadership and great leadership is the willingness to admit when you need help." Albert Collins had been sentenced to federal prison for securities fraud and conspiracy to commit corporate sabotage. His Precision Dynamics investment had been seized as part of restitution payments to Walker Industries, contributing to the legal settlement that funded additional modernization projects. Sharon Walker faced her own legal consequences, but had quietly agreed to sell her company's stock back to the family trust, severing her connection to the business she'd betrayed. Justice, as his grandfather had predicted, had been thorough if not swift. The ceremony concluded with networking and celebration, but Matthew found himself drawn away from the crowd toward the hotel's rooftop terrace, where Chicago's skyline sparkled under clear November skies. Lake Michigan stretched toward the horizon, its dark waters reflecting city lights like scattered diamonds. Eliana joined him at the terrace railing. her presence as natural and comforting as it had become over the past 6 months of partnership that had evolved into something deeper and more enduring than either had expected. "Congratulations, Mr. CEO of the Year," she said with gentle teasing. "Thank you, Miss Thomas," he replied formally, then smiled. "Though I believe your official title is now Chief Strategy Officer." The promotion had been unanimous among the board members, partly because Eliana's expertise had saved the company, but mostly because her partnership with Matthew had proven more effective than either could have achieved alone. They complemented each other's strengths, balanced each other's weaknesses, and made decisions with the kind of careful deliberation that came from complete trust. "About that other matter we discussed," Matthew said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "Which matter?" Eliana asked with obviously feigned innocence. "The matter of a certain question I promised to ask again after 6 months." Matthew withdrew a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a ring that sparkled with the same intensity as the city lights reflected on Lake Michigan. The diamond was perfectly cut, set in platinum that caught the moonlight with understated elegance, exactly the kind of sophisticated beauty that matched Eliana's personality. "Eliana Thomas," he said, taking her hand with fingers that trembled slightly despite his newfound confidence. "6 months ago you saved my company. Since then, you've saved my soul. Will you marry me?" The proposal was delivered under stars that witnessed their journey from professional adversaries to intellectual partners to lovers who discovered that the best relationships enhanced rather than compromised individual excellence. "Yes," Eliana said without hesitation, her voice carrying the certainty of someone who'd spent 6 months testing feelings that had only grown stronger under pressure. "Yes, Matthew Walker, I will marry you." The ring slipped onto her finger with perfect precision, as if it had been designed specifically for her hand. As Matthew kissed her under the Chicago skyline, he thought about his grandfather's philosophy, that business was about creating something that mattered, something that improved people's lives, something worth passing to the next generation. Thomas Walker would have been proud of what his grandson had built, not just a successful company, but a partnership that honored the best traditions while embracing necessary change. The ring slipped onto her finger with perfect precision, as if it had been designed specifically for her hand. Looking at Eliana's radiant smile, Matthew knew he'd finally learned the difference between protecting what you inherit and building what you believe in. 1 year later, their wedding was featured in Manufacturing Today magazine as an example of how professional partnerships could evolve into personal happiness without compromising either goal. The ceremony took place in Walker Industries' original factory building, now transformed into an event space that honored the company's heritage while celebrating its future. 1,500 employees attended, along with clients who'd become friends and competitors who'd become allies in the broader mission of revitalizing American manufacturing. The wedding cake was decorated with miniature precision-manufactured parts, made from sugar and chocolate, a whimsical tribute to the 8-year-old boy who'd once tried to improve metallurgy with cookie ingredients. As Matthew and Eliana danced their first dance as husband and wife, surrounded by the community they'd worked together to save and strengthen, he caught sight of a familiar figure standing near the back of the crowd. An elderly man with silver hair and steel-gray eyes, wearing a suit that seemed to shimmer slightly in the evening light. The man raised his hand in a subtle salute, grandfather to grandson, past to future, love transcending every boundary that logic could construct. Then he faded into the crowd like smoke dissolving in evening air, leaving behind only the certainty that some connections endure beyond death, beyond time, beyond every force that seeks to divide rather than unite. 5 years after that November evening, when a desperate board meeting had changed everything, Walker Industries stood as the undisputed leader in precision automotive manufacturing. The company employed 4,000 workers across 3 states, held patents on 17 revolutionary manufacturing processes, and commanded the kind of industry respect that Thomas Walker had originally envisioned. Matthew and Eliana's partnership had produced more than corporate success. It had created a model for how couples could build something greater together than either could achieve alone. Their marriage was featured in business schools as a case study in complementary leadership, while their company was cited by economists as proof that American manufacturing could compete and win in global markets. But the true measure of their success wasn't found in stock prices or profit margins. It was found in the faces of workers who came to their jobs with pride and purpose, in the communities that prospered around Walker Industries facilities, in the young engineers who chose manufacturing careers because they'd seen what was possible when innovation met integrity. Have you ever found that your greatest professional success came through letting someone help you become better than you thought possible? Share your partnership stories below. Tomorrow we have another incredible journey about a woman who turned her greatest challenge into her most powerful strength. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell. On quiet evenings when Matthew and Aliana worked late in offices that overlooked the factory floor where their love story had begun, they sometimes heard things that couldn't quite be explained. Footsteps in empty corridors, machinery humming with contentment, voices of workers long gone, still celebrating the success of dreams they'd helped build. Walker Industries had become more than a company. It had become a testament to the truth that love finds a way to protect what matters most, that courage can overcome any obstacle, and that the best leaders are those brave enough to admit when they need help. The factory floor buzzed with the efficient hum of cutting-edge machinery, operated by skilled workers who took pride in creating products that would last generations. The sound was music to Matthew's ears, not just because it represented profitability, but because it represented purpose. His grandfather had been right about many things, but most importantly about this: the best legacy isn't what you preserve, it's what you create. And what Matthew and Eliana had created together, professional excellence, personal happiness, industrial innovation, and enduring love, would continue growing long after their own story had become part of Walker Industries' rich history. Sometimes, late at night when the factory was quiet and the offices were empty, those who stayed late reported seeing figures moving through the production areas, checking machinery, reviewing quality standards, ensuring that the standards of excellence established 60 years ago continued into an uncertain but promising future. Whether those figures were security guards, dedicated employees, or something more supernatural, no one could say for certain. But everyone agreed that Walker Industries felt protected, blessed, watched over by forces that wanted only the best for the company and the people who depended on it. Love, after all, finds a way. Thank you for joining Matthew and Eliana's journey from corporate crisis to transformative love. Your support makes these inspiring stories possible. Tomorrow brings another tale of courage, love, and the power of believing in yourself when no one else will. Make sure you're subscribed so you never miss these uplifting stories that remind us all that love truly does conquer all. Community building. What partnerships in your own life have made you stronger than you ever imagined possible? Share your stories in the comments below, whether it's business, romance, friendship, or family. I love hearing how connection transforms us all. Until tomorrow, remember that sometimes the greatest risk is playing it safe, and the greatest reward comes from having the courage to change everything for love.